Let's take a look at the stored codes to see if we can sort this out. We have AP013B in the freeze frame. Heated O2 sensor slow response lean to rich, bank 1 sensor 2. We can look up the code set criteria later if we think we need to, but for now let's just take it at face value. Examining the engine runtime value, a little more than 4.5 minutes after the engine started, the downstream O2 sensor did not toggle rich like it was supposed to. Take a look at the bank 1 sensor 2 value, it only made it to 650 mV, which is below the upper switch point. The short-term fuel trim for bank 2 ramped up to 44%, trying to drive the downstream O2 sensor above the upper switch point. The upstream sensor for bank 2 was well above that, so this looks like the ECM might have been performing a special function. Now let's look at the P013B failure record. The data is slightly different, which means the P013B onboard test failed again after the freeze frame set and the mill came on. Notice that the engine runtime is almost exactly what it was on the freeze frame. In the freeze frame, it was 4 minutes and 34 seconds. Here it is 4 minutes and 37 seconds. That was significant. The short-term fuel trim for bank 1 was also very positive, just like the freeze frame. Notice as well, that the downstream O2 sensor never reached its upper switch point. Now let's look at the next failure record. It is AP013D. Heated O2 sensor slow response bank 2 sensor 2. This is interesting. Both downstream sensors are coding for a slow lean to rich transition. Notice the engine runtime when the P013D set. 4 minutes and 36 seconds. Very similar to the P013B code. More evidence that these codes are setting when the ECM is performing some kind of test. The short-term fuel trim correction for both banks is 44%. Notice also that both downstream sensors are below the upper switch point. Yet at the same time, the upstream sensors have switched and are reading rich. I concluded from this, that these codes were setting because the ECM was running some kind of onboard test and that test was failing. Instead of reporting that test failure, however, it was coding for parameters being monitored for the test, i.e., the lean to rich downstream sensor transition. But only during that test. Now let's take a look at the other codes, perhaps they can help us to figure this out. We have AP2270. Heated O2 sensor signal stuck lean bank 1 sensor 2. This code is very similar to the other codes. The sensor signal is stuck lean. Note the engine runtime when this code set. 4 minutes and 52 seconds. As before, we have a very high positive short-term fuel correction. The downstream sensors in this case are responding slightly better than what we saw in the freeze frame and the other failure records. Here is our last failure record, A. P2272. Heated O2 sensor signal stuck lean bank 2 sensor 2. The engine runtime was a little longer at 7 minutes and 1 second, but it was still early on in the trip. Interestingly, the short-term fuel trim correction was only excessively positive on bank 2. Here again, the downstream sensors have responded better to the trim correction. Have you noticed a pattern here? Now let's consider some of the engine data we captured. Let's start here. There is about 3.5 minutes on the screen of the test drive. We have engine speed, APP indicated angle, HO2S bank 1 sensor 2, and short-term fuel trim for bank 1. A couple of things are going on here. For one, the downstream sensor seems a little too active. The other is that on deceleration, or throttle cut, fuel trim ramps up to 34%, which is unusual. We've just swapped out the sensor and trim PIDs for the same data frame. We now see the downstream sensor for bank 2 and the short-term fuel trim correction for bank 2. Looks pretty much the same. This doesn't look right. I will admit. I wasn't really sure what to do. The downstream sensors had already been replaced per the PI, or preliminary information document. I called the support line and they told me to replace the catalytic converter assembly. I had my doubts. Well, it fixed it. Looking back at the data and the codes, it does make more sense. However, I found this to be disturbing. That was an expensive call and I don't know if I would have made it on my own. At any rate, this is fixed. I hope you have enjoyed this case study and that it has benefited you. I know I certainly learned something on this one.